because folks can scale, but if you don't scale with precision, you're actually scaling a mess. If we are able to find our inner child again, it actually brings out ideas that most teams and most individuals probably are just filtering out. And if we can actually communicate stories, then we can influence, we can inspire. Communicating expectations with the candidate. And it's all about the story again. It's a weird reward system of like, yeah, work for us and you'll get money versus come work for us and make an impact. Okay, let's actually get rid of the map, because if we wander, we actually truly get to understand the environment that we're in, and then we can talk about it and connect with more people.
Welcome to the podcast, Jocelyn, and congratulations on placing second in the Talentful Top 50 list. You're kind of a big deal.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Awesome. So I wanted to get straight to one of your main mottos for 2022. And that motto is building rainbows, which I found really interesting. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I always like to use metaphors in my life. I just think they're more inspirational. And I think with metaphors, if you forget all the words behind it, if you remember the image, it just helps you understand the meaning behind it. So for my team, our team, it's been about 3 years that we've grown. So year one is building foundation. So when I joined Duolingo, my remit was build T from the ground up. So build our foundation. Then it was scale with precision, because folks can scale, but if you don't scale with precision, you're actually scaling a mess. And then the third year, which is the year that we're currently in, is, okay, now that we've scaled with precision and things are pretty stable, now we need to actually build in cross-functionality. And so I did this whole presentation to our team at the end of last year to get us ready for 2022 about building rainbows. And there's a difference between building rays and building rainbows. So rainbow is essentially a ray of colors, but it has two ends, right? So if we have, for example, the university team and the industry team, the university team could be building a beautiful ray of colors, but if it actually doesn't connect over to industry, it's just a ray. It's just in one direction. But once we actually connect it over to industry, we're actually then sharing knowledge with each other and making it easier for each other. And we're just making things prettier and more fun and more magical in the interim as well.
That's awesome. And so when you're putting your plan together every year and you creating these metaphors, is that something that you find really important? And how do you go about formulating those? What's the plan to put those together, and how do you then share it with the team? It's really interesting.
Yeah. So I've always been a big fan of metaphors because I'm just personally a visual person. I learn and communicate through visuals. And I strongly believe in adults, we need to tap back into our childhood. If we are able to find our inner child again, it actually brings out ideas that most teams and most individuals probably are just filtering out. And so where that comes from is also using metaphors that are quite simple that we knew about when we were a kid. And that metaphor then can inspire new thinking. But typically I like to just find one thing, one symbol, one image to represent everything.
That's really cool. And how do you always done that? Is there an inspiration for that? And since you've been doing it, have you found an impact? Have you found it's been successful and people share in the I guess your thought process?
Yeah. So I've always been like this. One example is I was the number one reader in my class until first grade. The reason why is words were introduced in first grade. So I just loved storybooks as a child. The visuals meant so much to me. So I naturally am just more of a storyteller. And one thing that my team says I do quite well is I take really complex ideas and simplify them into a story. And if we can actually communicate stories, then we can influence, we can inspire. And we have seen this whole metaphor of rainbows really play out in a fun way within our team, where we use Slack quite often. And if there's a cross-functional celebration that we have, we always hit the rainbow emoji. So then it actually reinforces us to be like, oh, we're celebrating that cross-functional win, but what else can we do here? We even have a rainbow that's a sparkly rainbow. So if it's a really good rainbow that we built, then we make sure we use a sparkly emoji. But it's also just been integrated into our common talk. For example, yesterday we had a TA team meeting and someone shared a rainbow that they built.
That's awesome.
And I think one thing that I learned from this, and it takes a bit of courage to have these kind of child childhood and childlike images. When I shared this with a team, I remember saying, and now our big mantra of our 2022 is building rainbows. And there was silence, right? So sometimes it can be scary for a leader to stand up and be silly, because there's that perception of like, oh, will they not take me seriously? But I truly believe that if you own that and you really are passionate about that specific metaphor or that silly thing, it inspires others to come along. So now we just like all use the term building rainbows. But initially it was like a few seconds of awkward silence, and then we got into it.
Yeah. Well, one of the, I think, most important things for a leader to be able to do is to tell stories and bring people along on that story with them. So it seems like you found your unique way of doing that. That's really, really cool.
Yeah.
Another thing that I mentioned in the intro was the locations that you're helping scale Duolingo across. And if you look back over your career, that seems to be something that you've done a lot of, launching into new geographies, managing scale across different locations. If, for the talent leaders out there that are looking to maybe support a location for the first time or launch in a new area and help those teams hire great talent, what do you think are the key steps in making sure that those talent leaders are set up for success? What have you found to be most useful?
Yeah, there are two things that I typically do. One is, so I come from a marketing and advertising background. So my intuition from a more academic framework perspective is like understand the target audience. So if we're, let's say, I'm making this up, opening up in Singapore, then we should generally know through research what the culture is like, how they do business, what the values are. We can get all that from research. So that's key for just like foundational understanding. But what I always make sure I do, and I think this is where actually a lot of leaders miss, is putting yourself into the experience to define your own. Because if we actually don't define our own experience, we're actually just generalizing, and that ends up being stereotyping. And then that actually creates divides within a team. So I think it all comes from a level of curiosity. So when I went overseas to work in Singapore, my goal was to be seen as a local. Not because like I didn't want to be seen as a local, but I was like, if people think that I'm a local and treat me like a local, that means I've really integrated into the culture. And then I can start really understanding what life is like. And if I can understand what life is like in Singapore and working at this specific company, then I can actually talk about it better with candidates. And if I can talk about it better with candidates, then I'm getting the authentic version of the candidate. And I can understand truly what their concerns are or what their desires are. But if I myself don't even understand what it's like to live in Singapore as a local, then I'm actually not effective. I'm going to be pretty limited in how effective I am at work. And that worked quite well, to where it also helped with internal relationships within the team.
Awesome. Yeah, I bet. And so in terms of practically how that manifests, obviously it sounds like you went to Singapore yourself. If you were going to other locations, or maybe a select talent leader isn't able to travel over, is there another way? Would they send a team member? Would they use some kind of outsourced research company? Is there a way that you think people can be successful if they don't even get to go or the ability to go and move over?
Yeah, I think there's one that's quite simple. Simple to say, simple to do, but because it's so simple, often overlooked, which is just talking to teammates who are in the location. And this can be even something as simple as Pittsburgh to New York. Like Pittsburgh and New York are totally different, right? Maybe I can't go to New York, but if I have a good relationship with our New York team and I just ask how someone's weekend was, maybe they talk about a new restaurant that they went to that opened up. Well, now I know about that, and maybe then I can look up that restaurant on Instagram and virtually experience what it's like to be able to talk about it. So I also think with technology these days, we can kind of stalk and be in all these different locations without actually being in it. And no one knows that we learned about it through Instagram or TikTok, but at least we can say something about it.
Talentful provides flexible recruiting solutions to the world's most ambitious companies. Are you thinking about ways to add flexibility to your talent function? With recent market volatility and hiring set to return to growth mode in the near future, there's never been a better time to choose the right partner to help you scale. Talentful's embedded sourcing, recruiting, coordination, and talent advisory services have been trusted by the world's leading brands. Companies such as Atlassian, Microsoft, Expedia, Pinterest, Waymo, and more. Whether you're hiring across engineering, go-to-market, or G&A, Talentful has got you covered. To find out how Talentful can help you, visit talentful.com.
And do you feel like in the example of, the US versus Asia and do you have to adapt your interview processes? Do you have to adapt your just general processes to fit in with the culture? Like, where do you draw the line between keeping continuity in a process and adapting it for that specific culture, I guess? Like, how do you balance that?
Yeah, and everyone's approach is different because I think it comes down to what the company values. Are they an HQ-centric company or no? And do they want to keep culture consistent across the offices across the globe? My approach has always been, let's understand what the non-negotiables are. So, for example, when I worked in Singapore, we had to ask for the pay stub. That was just like a thing, but if we never asked for that in the US, right? So there's some just like cultural norms that if you don't do it as a company, the candidates will be like, why are you even here if you don't understand who we are as a country? So those to me are non-negotiables of just like, is the company actually empathetic towards norms? The rest, what I've found is it comes down to communicating expectations with the candidate. And it's all about the story again. So let's say we're a company where, and I'm making this all up, we're a company where we want every process, in an interview process step to be done exactly the same as in the US and for it to all be conducted in English. As long as we have a good story around it, people are understanding. But if we actually don't attach a story to it, candidates make up their own story. And then suddenly you have like 10 disparate stories showing up on Glassdoor. And that's then when actually you really lose the company culture piece. So I think it all goes back to a bit of storytelling.
Yeah, awesome. And that's a nice segue into my next topic, which I guess maybe is influenced by your background in advertising and marketing, but I know that personal branding is something that you're passionate about. And so I guess from your point of view, why is that important for recruiters to invest in and build their personal brand?
Yeah, quite frankly, just makes our lives easier, our work lives easier. It brings a lot of efficiency. So the way I look at it is if any of our recruiters were ever to leave the company, they should leave with a whole network with them. And if you flip it, if a candidate is looking to leave, let's say there's an engineer at X company, if they're looking for a new job, they probably will think, what recruiters do I know? The amazing thing would be if they named every recruiter on our team, right? So that's why personal branding is so important. It just makes everyone's lives easier, work lives easier. I also think there's a lot of fun with it. In TA, a lot of it is being able to understand someone authentically. And if you yourself aren't able to articulate what your brand value is and who you are as a leader or what the company is like and your perspective on the company, then it actually goes back to the story piece. It makes your story hard to believe. And for me, why I even started thinking about personal branding tying to TA is this was back in like 2008, 2009 when social media just started. And I was in one location, but hiring for multiple locations. And I was the only recruiter for the entire company. It was like 700 people. So I knew I had to optimize my own efforts. And I thought, well, I can't go to all these billion events because I'm one person. But what I can do is if I virtually am at these events, for example, if there are photos on Facebook and people are tagged, like I'm kind of at the event. And if I comment on this photo and people are like, oh, I know Jocelyn, then they'll naturally start thinking about the company that I was working at. And so that's why I started thinking about personal branding is like, okay, whether we show up in person or virtually, like people should have a sentiment there if they can attach the company name and good job opportunities with us. It only makes everything easier.
Absolutely.
There is an interesting piece to this though of personal branding can also backfire. You can be personally branded as the terrible recruiter. And if you do comment on a photo or show up at an event, people are like, oh, you need to avoid that recruiter. So there's a double-edged sword there.
And do you think that in today's market, leveraging your personal brand can actually help you negotiate a better salary or get a better job? Do you think we're at that stage? Do you think it is counted as something that is valuable when people are taking that next step?
I think it is, but I think it's more introspective, in that if you are able to articulate what uniqueness you bring, you naturally are able to negotiate more because people see that value in you. But if you're actually not able to articulate that value to others, like, it doesn't make sense for them to want to negotiate. So I think it's more personal branding is an exercise of what do I stand for? What uniqueness do I bring?
And so for the people out there who maybe are stuck or they don't know how to get their personal brand started or don't really know what to do, or maybe they overthink it, what would you say are some of the kind of simple or starting steps that people can take to start improving their personal brand?
I love this question. I used to teach this one course all about personal branding, and we would do this exercise. And this exercise always took the longest. So I'll caveat this with it probably will take about 2 months of self-discovery. And the question I always ask people to try to get to that point is, before you even knew what working was like, probably when you're like 6 or 7, and your parents said, "What do you want to be when you want to grow up?" We all had an answer. And maybe that answer shifted over time, but we all had that dream. And if we figure out like what is that trend amongst those dreams, we can pretty much figure out our personal brand. So for me, I remember going to my first circus is Barnum and Bailey. It was like a $7 show, something very cheap. And I was like, I want to be the hula hoop girl. Like, I just want to be her. I'm really good at hula hooping and I want to be on stage. And then like 2 years later, my mom asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, Harriet the Spy. And that was when the movie had just come out and I read the book and I was like, I love that she solves clues. Like, she's the most unsuspected person, but she will solve it all. And she has fun doing it. And so if you think about like hula hoop girl and Harriet the Spy, people are like, oh, there's no trend behind that. But there actually is. And it's actually exactly what I'm doing today, which is that I sniff out clues on how do we solve this thing called recruiting. Like, yeah, engineers are really hard to get. Now, let's put all these disparate data points together to understand how do we get the best software engineers? When is the right point to reach out to them? How do we get them? So that's like the Harriet Spy part. And then I also talk to candidates all day long. I go to events. We're having this podcast. That's like the hula hoop girl part. So it's like that blend. And then if I think through when I was in middle school, high school, and I knew jobs, real jobs existed, I wanted to be a swim coach and I wanted to be a hairdresser. And again, people will think these two are not related at all, but the thread there is it's all into transformation. So when I think back to swim coaching, why did I really love that? It's because I took someone who was terrified of water to swimming a full lap and sometimes even like winning a medal. That transformation was very satisfying to me. Hair. I would wake my sister up at 7 a.m. and say, I want to braid your hair. She'd be like, why? Like, we're 2 hours early. Why? I said, I want to make your hair look pretty. I love seeing your hair go from bed hair to beautiful French braids. And so again, I apply that to recruiting of every place I've joined. It's been at a point of transformation where I'm building and scaling. So that then informs me on what my personal brand is. But I often ask people, like, remove all your adult thinking. What did you want to be when you were a kid? And what were you just like so adamant about, and really dig into what the common threads there are.
Why do people, in your opinion, get stuck on that point?
I think it's the reward system that we are trained to believe when we're adults. It's like, oh, I need to make money. I need to hold down a job. When it's like, those will come if we can actually figure out what drives us. If we don't know what drives us, we're always going to get the wrong job. And then we'll never be happy with the money. The money will not ever bring us joy. And if the money's not bringing you joy, you're probably not going to perform. And then you won't get more money if you do care about money, right? So I think it's just like removing that reward system, which is why I always tell people, like, forget you're an adult. Think back to when you were a child, when getting a lollipop was so wonderful. But now as an adult, when I get a lollipop, I'm like, I don't want it.
Yeah. It loses the magic. You need to go ignite the spark again. And so once people have that foundational understanding of, okay, this is who I am, this is what excites me, this is what drives me, what do they do then? How do they get that out into the world? Like, what are the steps they can take to, I guess, start the motion?
Yeah. So I think it's key. The mistake I made is I didn't know this is what drove me until mid-career. I wish I'd figured out early career. So I think there are two groups. One, if you're early in career, then it's basically saying that this is what you believe in and talk to a ton of companies to see if that's also what they're looking for. I think that's actually an easier stage to be in. When you're mid-career, like me, I had to then shift my head of like, okay, I'm not really excited by the work I'm doing, but I have a great foundation. Now, how do I apply my foundation to a place that does need my desire to transform and does believe in scaling and building? And that took having some informational interviews. It took also just researching. I also, at the time, would put Google alerts on the companies that I was interested in, and they were my news feed. So then I started getting an understanding of like what their business is like. And if I can understand what their business is like and they're growing quite a bit, then it might be a good place to talk to at the moment. But just keeping what your values are top of mind is key.
So making sure that your brand is reflected in the company you're working for. That's super important. Yeah.
Yeah. And I see a lot of candidates do this where they think, oh, I'm the candidate, I can't ask any questions. It's really key to ask questions as a candidate as well.
Absolutely, 100%. Especially in this market where candidates are really in the driving seat. Should be the opportunity really to find that opportunity is the perfect one. Why do you think that, it seems like people's desire or to stay in a role for a long period of time, or maybe, they're just not finding the right roles. Maybe they're not asking those right questions, but tenures are dropping, right? People are spending less time in positions, they're moving around jobs more. Can you pinpoint why you think like that? Is it a case of it's just more competitive, or people just aren't finding their perfect match? They're not finding the companies that reflect their values?
I think it's a combination of all of that. Because there is a talent shortage, and I use quotes because it is a very dramatic phrase. It's a fact, but it's very dramatic in my head. Because there is a talent shortage, I think it's easy to get lured away, especially if you're early in career or maybe even mid-career, right? Maybe you're trying to plan for a specific life stage and you're like, whoa, that company's going to double my salary. Like, yeah, of course I'm going to leave. And I'll only stay for a year because I'll collect that money and then go somewhere else. So that contributes for sure. What I think is also because there's that talent shortage, we actually are devaluing our own values a bit. We're seeing things more transactionally, which is why at Duolingo, like, I'm so grateful that we care so much about the mission, both as a company and candidates we talk to and people we hire, to where we'll make sure everyone's paid well. But it's, are we aligned on our mission and values? But I do think with the talent shortage and people just literally throwing money, companies throwing money, it's a weird reward system of like, yeah, work for us and you'll get money versus come work for us and make an impact. But if we think about the latter, that's when really people start staying.
Absolutely. And it goes back to the point you were talking about on finding out what your brand is. If you really deeply understand what drives you, and you're in a business that gives you what you need in terms of those drivers and lets you have the impact that you want to have. I like to think that people wouldn't move, but like you said, the market has just been so hot that at a certain point for people, the amount of money that's being offered to change jobs is just, I guess, overcompensating for people's desire to have a brand that they really love working with and enjoy. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens now the market's cooling down.
Yeah, I'm really curious as well, because what I am starting to see is because so many candidates are staying at a company for, let's say, a year, when I ask questions on what they've been able to accomplish and the impact, the impact has been significantly decreased because you can only do so much in a year, right? Typically, it's like you onboard for 6 months, then you start understanding what you need to do. And year one, you're like, all right, I can start doing things. If you leave, you actually have not much to show. Whereas if you are at a company for longer, it's easier to say exactly your impact. So I'm also curious to see how it plays out, especially with negotiation of specific scope.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to have a first pass ticket to see how this all goes. So
Yeah.
you do a great job of getting your thoughts and opinions out there. And if people don't know where they can find you already, it's Twitter at Jocelyn S. Lai. So I took some quotes from your Twitter, and some of them are hilarious. I tried to find ones that we could talk about here that maybe translate to work and how people show up, and just your general philosophy on professional life. So the first one is, it doesn't take much time to find problems, it takes time to solve them. I guess I'm really interested in the context behind this, but also, when people find problems, what do you recommend?
Yeah, so the reason I mentioned this is I was probably having a day where we were just talking about so many problems, and it's like, whoa, how do we need to solve them? And the reason I tweeted this, and I truly, truly believe this, everything I tweet, I truly believe. I think it's very easy to say, here are the 10 things that are wrong in our world. Like, anyone could say that. It takes zero courage, because usually the problems are so obvious that everyone agrees to it. What takes way more courage is to say, yes, that is a problem. That's a really big problem, and I'm here to solve it. Because the solution, sometimes people don't want the problem solved. Or maybe some people don't like the solution that you bring. Or some people don't want to put in the work because it is a really big problem. So the reason why I think why I tweeted it is we actually need more courage in the workplace of tackling big problems, and then encouraging each other to put in the hard work, because it's hard and we actually can't do it alone. And what we need to do is identify what that one problem is that we care about, and then all attack it, versus spending so much time thinking about the problems that we don't even have time to solve. It's when we solve things that we then feel satisfied with our impact and see our own value. And that then inspires us to solve problem number 2, then 3, then 4, 5, 6.
And is there a way that you, I guess, encourage people to be courageous in your teams? And you found anything that works well in getting people to step up and suggest solutions?
Yeah, so one thing that I abide by is, as a leader, yes, I should lead and make tough decisions and influence and all that stuff, but I also should be about 20% of an idiot. And I say that because if I can't be silly, and if I can't feel like an idiot, then no one else on the team is allowed to do that either. So I always make sure that I put in space for fun, because the funness is what actually allows people to have courage, because then they don't feel judged. They feel like, oh, any idea can be possible. So that's one thing that I do. The second one is, instead of speaking in statements, it's also speaking with questions. So if someone brings up a problem, it's not like, yeah, I agree that's a problem, like list 10 reasons why I think it's a problem and that they should fix it. It's more like, I want to understand, like, why do you think it's a problem? What do you think it impacts? And then what do you think we should do about it? Like, is it actually one that we should solve? And so I think bringing people along and hearing their perspective actually helps us figure out, 1, do we need to solve it? Is it a priority? And then 2, we already have some ideas now for the solution. And that actually then is quite exciting.
Yeah, awesome. That's great. And this second statement I love, but it's there's a difference between caring and being bothered. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. Now I'm wondering, were these on the same day? Like, was I having a rough day? I tend to do this like contrast thing. I like to play with words because I think I truly believe words have a big impact. So for me, the difference between caring and being bothered is, caring means it's about the other person and how you can help them and how you understand them. Being bothered is like, you did this to me, and now like I'm helpless. There's like a victim mentality. And this actually does tie to the previous tweets, and I'm curious if it's the same day, of there's just a lot of weirdness going on in the world right now. Like, my list of things that I'm unhappy with in the world just keeps growing. I think it's like that for all of us. But it's so key for us to remember to look at each other and care about each other of, hey, how do we solve it together? And it's like, what problem do we really want to solve first, versus trying to attack all of them? So yeah, caring and being bothered is like, it's about the other person versus what you did to me.
Is there any ways that you encourage that? One of the things that some of our teams do, which I think is actually really nice, it seems very simple, but it works really nicely, is having like a gratitude session where everyone at the end of the week just says what they're grateful for in their team. And it just creates this really nice sense of, everyone's there for each other. We appreciate each other. We see the hard work that's being done, and we're calling out, the positives rather than, like you said, sometimes when you're working, you're working hard and you're trying to solve problems. It's easy to focus on just the negatives and the things that need to be fixed rather than calling out those positives. Is there anything else that could work and help influence caring between teams?
Yeah, we've done that before as well. It's wonderful. One thing that we've also done is we did this last year when we were trying to scale with precision, was what did we do that made us 1% better this week? And that just makes it a bit more possible and realistic, because sometimes we want to solve all of it and it just can seem so daunting. But if we think about 1% every single week, we can make a lot of progress that way, especially if we do it as a team, right? That's one thing. The other thing that we did recently, this is about 2 weeks ago, is we went around the room or planning for our next offsite. And the whole thought there is we all have developed a lot of skill set now to where each of us has a specific expertise and we can actually teach each other. So we went around the room and said, Chris, and everyone just said, this is what Chris is great at. Jocelyn, this is what Jocelyn is great at. And we're going to turn those into little mini TED Talks for our offsite so we can actually learn from each other. But that was a great moment of like, whoa, very few people actually have the same expertise, which is wonderful, because that's a key to scaling, is through expertise and skill sets that are diversified.
That's really awesome. And the final point is, rather than telling them what to do, point out a gap between their attitudes and their actions, what they're going to do and what they might recommend for someone else. So this is really interesting. I kind of took a few things away from this, but I'm interested to hear where it came from.
Yeah, so this is like very hot Jocelyn take, so apologies in advance. I was actually thinking about it this morning. Not the tweet, but this hot take that I'm about to share. We are in like a notifications culture. And what that means is we forget how to solve things. We forget how to think for ourselves. Like, I was thinking about the speed of emails. Before notifications existed on my laptop on emails and Slacks, I would have to remember I need to go refresh my email every single hour. So there's a level of accountability, and I had to be accountable to solve. But now I never have to go into my inbox to see was there an important message, because I just get notified. Same thing for like if there's a thunderstorm coming, I don't have to prep for it in advance because I know it's coming if I'm notified. So this point came out from, I'm seeing this a lot in the workplace as well. As we become more and more notifications humans, we expect people to tell us exactly what to do to solve a problem, when really it's like, whoa, that's why we're all here. Like, we need to figure it out together. And actually, that's why I hired you, is I care about your opinion more than mine. So this is also why I think asking questions versus making statements with a period is actually even more important nowadays, because we're just trained so much by our devices just to do exactly what we're told. So we have to flip that.
That is really interesting. I really like the way you frame that. I also have this debate in my head all the time. Like, I love Slack, but I do debate sometimes whether it's a good tool. To be honest, I'm just getting, it's so distracting and it's so instantaneous, and it's so easy for someone to just be in the moment and not really think through the situation they're in and just send a message straight away. And then that disrupts the other person. And it might not even be a big deal at all once the person's, just thought about how to handle it themselves, and come up with a solution. It might not be worth disrupting 5 other people for. But I think you get a lot of this like fast movement, lack of really deep thought around problems, and just this spontaneity, just like, oh, there you go, there's a message out. And I think at scale, that is actually really disruptive.
Yep. I totally agree. And I think about this quite often when I visit new places. It used to be I would show up to a place, I would take a picture on my like handheld camera of a MapQuest printout, and I'd be like, all right, I don't know how to get there, but I'll figure it out. Now when I get to a new place, I put it into my phone and I'm like, okay, where is the blue dot facing? And I'll literally follow this path as if I didn't have a brain, right?
Yeah.
And so this kind of goes back to what we were talking about. How do we scale globally? It's okay, let's actually get rid of the map and not have the phone. Let's just wander when we're in a new place. Because if we wander, we actually truly get to understand the environment that we're in. And then we can talk about it and connect with more people because there are more moments of being shared. Otherwise, we're just following a path.
Yeah. I sometimes fantasize, and I hope maybe at one point that we just have this rebellion against technology and we're on flip phones and, we're playing Snake and, all this kind of stuff is going on. I'm not sure if it'll ever happen, but I think it would be very useful for a lot of people. So I know I've taken a lot of your time. The last question that I have, Jocelyn, is what are you most excited about and where do you see the future of recruiting going? What are the key themes that you see for recruiting moving forward?
Yeah, what I'm most excited about is it's nuts right now in recruiting. And that might sound nuts to say that, but I truly believe right now, and this is a personal belief of mine, is when things get really, really hard and challenging, that's when really good ideas happen. For example, when pandemic happened, we're like, well, guess we can't do on-site interviews or tours, but we need to exude our culture. So we decided, let's actually just ship our culture to candidates. And we were one of the first companies to do that. So I'm really excited about that for recruiting because recruiting, I think, historically has always been quite transactional. But now we're forced to be more creative. We're forced to be better negotiators. We're forced to be better storytellers. We're forced to be better business folks, better teammates to encourage each other and inspire each other. So that's really what excites me is I really think there's a reinvention era coming with recruiting.
That's very exciting. I hope you're right. I'm also very similar to you. So thanks a lot, Jocelyn, for the time. It's been great to chat, and I'm sure everyone listening is going to be inspired by the conversation. And see you soon.
Great. Thanks, Chris.